So let's get going. So I'm going to share a couple of slides. Good afternoon. I am Anto Budiojo. Welcome to Monday Live, something that we do every 3 o'clock on Mondays to get us through the pandemic and figure out what's on the other side. Profiles of the members are on mondaylive.org. Just a reminder that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. And please do post comments and questions in the Zoom tools. I think you all know how to do that. And if possible, complete the survey at the end. This slide deck with a few links that the members are sharing is available on mondaylive.org. So this is our agenda for today. Chit chat about what's going on. And then the main part of the show is on the future of BAS services. And then hopefully we'll have plenty of time to have some discussion and questions answered. Ken is continuing his navigating into Never Never Land for his November theme. I saw this, and I know that we've talked about this on and off over the past weeks, but the situation in the retail space continues to be dire. And this last point that I saw here was kind of important because it's going to affect a lot of other people as the commercial real estate industry kind of suffers. So just keep that in mind. Jim talking about Manhattan again. We'll talk about that, I'm sure. Mark is talking about, we'll dig into that in a minute with Mark. And Scott is, I saw this, and Bill actually saw this as well, about the sort of comments about Zoom calls and how this is affecting productivity. So we'll talk about that briefly. And that's it as far as the slides. So let's turn it to the group. Who wants to make comments from those slides? Anybody want to chime in? Okay, then
I'll jump. So my slide, it was an interesting one. I actually found it maybe about an hour ago, how during this whole COVID thing, we all, whether personal or in business, experienced shortage in the supply chain of various products. Again, whether it's toilet paper, mask, you name it, or on the business side, it could have been electrical components for controllers, this, that, and the other. And it was an interesting article comparing, has lean manufacturing was that part of a cause and effect to the COVID? So I just thought that was interesting. Never thought about it that way, but I suggest if that is of interest to folks, definitely take a read at it. It's Industry Week is making a comment about it. So kind of an interesting approach to how something that I think most people have been practicing, or most businesses and organizations have been practicing for years now. And is this a weakness in lean manufacturing? I don't know. I don't have the answer. Just calling people's
Mark,
attention.
Did the article talk about that relative to inventory lower because lean reduces inventories?
It did.
Therefore they didn't have sufficient raw materials on hand to respond to a spike in demand?
Correct. That was one of the key points. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely makes sense.
Absolutely.
The whole concept of just-in-time deliveries is fundamentally brittle. It's kind of designed to be that way. Mm-hmm. So that's why things can break.
Yeah.
Quite easily.
Okay, if speak briefly to the navigating Never Never. I think what I'm seeing is, for automated buildings, is we've always offered this service of linking together the .coms, and now we have so many folks publishing great material on their own sites, and so our focus is going to be in the joke of Mr. Linkler, that I'm going to be linking, as we've always been doing, where we've been linking .coms, we're now going to be linking blogs and particular pieces of media. The other thing I think is the social media by design tends to take our thinking and keep it controlled and keeps returning us the stuff we know. And we very much lose diversity. So I think we have to work hard to try and pull together the diversity that is surrounding our industry. And so that's going to be my goal for the next little while in my navigating my own personal Never Never is I'll be actually promoting other publications and trying to bring them, trying to relate them to our industry. So that's sort of the area. And in doing that, I've got a couple of links there, one from McKinsey and Company. They've done a great job of just providing some interactive data displays on COVID. And then there's also this workplace leaders handbook, which is really good. So I see that is more my purpose going forward is to try and provide a content matter for automated buildings. But what I'm trying to do too is reach out and touch a little bit of the diversity that is necessary for us all to move forward.
That's a great point, Ken. A great role for a guy like you too, man. So I'm thinking about, even with today's topic and that article that you showed, Anto, about Zoom calls and how they're just horrible for creativity and so forth. I'm struck by, and even though today's topic on BAS services doesn't seem like it, and Ken's comments, this great COVID, which has been a technical advancer for sure, accelerator, there's a lot. I'm touched by the human aspect of all this, which is really where it all is playing, the humanity of Zoom calls and being in offices and selling or buying services and diversity and bringing all this, just the human aspect of all this, of great interest to me too. And so, and it touches every part of it. And when the people on this call, the leaders and technology professionals on this call realize it's more human than we think, I think our effectiveness levels will go way up.
One thing I thought interesting about that article was that they especially pointed out that Mondays and Fridays, the productivity using Zoom seems to be less than the middle of the week, which is kind of strange. I'm not sure what to make of that.
Yeah, I guess the thing I'm looking at, it was interesting to see these CEOs like Jamie Dimon coming out and saying, hey, this is really affecting our effectiveness, and here are the reasons. But where's the behavioral change? So my daughter's, up in New York working for Morgan Stanley now, and she still can't go into the building. So she's working out of her apartment and she's about 15 blocks from their corporate headquarters, because they still haven't figured out that it's safe to let employees go in the building. So I hear it from the top that, okay, it's not working great, but they're not providing any options. They're still too scared to open up the buildings. So it doesn't seem to me like we've solved the perception problem in a practical way that gives people the confidence to open the buildings back up. Despite grocery stores, hardware stores, etc., where we all go all the time, somehow office buildings are, you can't navigate an office building, but that seems to be the reality right now. So has anybody seen any change there?
Is that you can't go, to your point, because in this case, the building owner or the business has decided not to reopen yet.
Mm-hmm.
But is it more due to risk, their own risk and their employees and associates' risk, versus a grocery store? We don't think about risk. We just go in, get the food because we have to in order to quote unquote survive. So is there some kind of difference depending on the type of situation that you're faced with?
Yeah, I think, Mark, you make the point in the case of the grocery store, we don't have a choice, right? You have to, I mean, I suppose you could do takeout food, but that gets overly expensive. But You don't have to go into the office. You're right. If you can have your employees work from home or remotely.
Right.
So why take the risk? And what the article is pointing out is that why take the risk? Because it affects business productivity and future success. That's why you take the risk. But what I'm looking for is the Jamie Dimons of the world to walk the talk. Because we've spent 4 or 5 months now talking about all the different things that can be done to social distance inside of space, spread out the offices, put shields up if you have to, wear masks, improve the ventilation. We've gone over all the different things. So there's a way to manage the risk, but are these CEOs willing to actually take that chance?
I think that's it.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that yes, I concur. But the other thing is that pick up the news or link onto a news bite at any given point in time. Now you're hearing the increase in cases or whatever you want to, however you want to.
Cases have gone up again.
Yeah. And you're going, all right, that right there says cases are going up, and it's not in one geographic location. It's basically across, for the most part, across the entire country right now. And to go, if I'm a CEO, I am not going to risk it. Just plain and simple, I will suffer a little bit on the productivity side, but to keep people safe and healthy, that to me, you can't put a price tag on that. I don't know. Go ahead.
Sorry, the thing I've seen, Steve, in the APAC region, people are going back to the offices, and they're doing this A-B team combination. They're splitting their people up into A team, B teams. A team can only, and the A team, B team is either time based. A team comes on Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays, and B team comes Tuesday, so they can't cross contaminate, which is kind of interesting because it means that if someone does come down, you're not taking out the whole company. I think that's the part that CEOs are worried about, right? Is that if you've got one case, the potential of taking out the whole company, is high, right? And how do you mitigate that? So they're doing that A/B, or they're doing it physically. One's on one floor, one's on the other floor, and it seems to be working successfully there. Have anyone heard about someone trying similar stuff here, where they separate the teams? Because the two parameters they're worried about is time. You spend 8 hours in the building versus minutes in a restaurant or a shop, and B, if I get infected in the restaurant, okay, I'm going to take me and my family, but if I take out the company, then that's a huge deal, right?
Well, public schools are, at least some of them have this so-called hybrid model in which the kids are going a couple of days a week and a different set of kids are going the other couple of days a week. So I think that's sort of along the lines of what you're mentioning, Anno.
Yeah, so, it seems prevalent in APAC. Everyone's doing it there.
Okay, so let us move on to our main subject, which is, and I'm going to pull in George and Dave. So George West from Albireo and Dave Bishop from JCI is joining us to talk about services, or specifically the future of services. So welcome, George and Dave. Glad to have you here with us.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So George, just because you're on the left of my screen, let me start with you. Can I ask you to just give us your views as to what you're doing in services, and how you're seeing things change as we get through the pandemic, and your views on what it's likely to be once we stabilize into some new normal? And then the same for Dave.
That's a fairly broad topic, so let me frame it a little bit. Right now, I've been in the industry 35, 36 years and worked across a lot of verticals, but right now I'm especially focused on larger class A and B office buildings and doing a lot with pharma life science, which has been interesting in lots of different ways right now. And so I thought about this in terms of what you would traditionally think of as service, right? So service contracts, ongoing support and service of the operation of the system. Obviously, you can take services into a lot of broader definitions than that, but I sort of stayed in that pool. I'm happy to comment outside of that, but that's sort of where I framed most of my thoughts around this. From Alberio's standpoint, services really start with a couple of key things. First and foremost, what's the customer's goals and priorities for operating their facility? What are they trying to accomplish? And what's their strategy for doing that? We have customers that run the gamut from fully outsourcing to fully insourcing and everything in between. And so for us, we think you got to start with that, and then you've got to build an offering and a solution set that allows you to tailor to that customer's goals and to their strategies, and also recognize that what they're doing today, especially true in this past year, what they're doing today isn't necessarily what they're going to be doing a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now. So whatever you're doing has got to be built in such a way, both in terms of the offering and your workforce to deliver it. It's got to be built in such a way that you can respond to those changes as they occur. And ideally, if you're really, really good, see them before they happen and respond before the customer even knows that you need to. So service for us is really that combination of what is it that they want to accomplish? How do we help them deliver that? And how do we fit what we're doing into their strategy for running that facility? In terms of COVID specific things, the other sort of framing comment I need to make is, unlike other parts of the country, here in the Northeast, and it was interesting what you guys were just talking about people going back to the office, the vast majority of the people are not in the office. We have customers that have very large campuses in downtown Boston, and there is nobody there. We have other customers that were literally finishing up multi-$100-million properties just as the virus hit, and they have literally not occupied that facility yet. They've moved some essential personnel in, but in terms of day-to-day operation and occupancy, they're not there yet. So to a large extent, we're still in a bit of a wait and see mode in terms of what this is going to mean, because people haven't gone back to the office. We saw early on, there was a small flurry of people who were saying, holy cow, I need to implement a purge mode. Holy cow, I want to do this change. I want to flush as much air in as I can. Sort of rash, honestly, knee-jerk responses that happened and then kind of went away. We then saw people sort of settle down a little bit, and we saw an evolution in terms of site-specific protocols for how do you gain access to the site? What do you do when you're on site? How do you behave? It's presented some interesting challenges for us in terms of, if we have a two-person problem, how do we deal with that? How do we get two people there to work to solve that problem? If we're working closely with the operators or the owner's staff, how do we make that work in a safe, productive way? We've seen more interest in and acceptance in remote services. We again have sort of ridden that curve of, or roller coaster is a better description of, geez, our building shut down, nobody can come in, but we need to keep it operating because we've got a vivarium in here. Can you do what you normally do for us, but do it remotely? We've seen customers that have historically had little interest in allowing us to have remote access to their buildings, who are now saying, you know what, we really need to rethink that, because we've realized, yeah, we're worried about the cybersecurity aspects of this, but we're also worried about the viability of operating our facility. And if we're not in that building, but we've got critical operations in there still ongoing that need attention, we want to be able to bring the best in class solutions to address that. We'll give you remote access in this manner. And to the extent that as a service provider, you can help them be comfortable with what that manner looks like and provide them with a solution that their IT organization is comfortable with, then you can effectively meet their needs. As I said, most of the customers are really still in a wait and see mode. Even when we go out to talk to them, we're talking about ASHRAE recommendations. What are you going to do about changes in operating practices or anything along those lines? And the vast majority of them are still in the we don't know. We've had a good number of customers that have said flat out they're not planning on being back in their buildings until next June. And we think after the first year, they may think more deeply about what they're going to do. And on one level, I can't blame them, because if you if you sort of go back to April, May, and you say, okay, well, what would I have done if I was running a building then versus what do I do now? It might be a little less different, or a little more different, a little less of a hard right turn. And I think over time, we're going to get more clarity around what needs to happen and what people are going to want to do. And we'll start to see implementation near the end of the year. We do think longer term, the action recommendations are going to become a fundamental part of what everybody does. I think that, one sort of, and I hate to say silver lining this, but positive aspect of this is I think people are going to be a lot more concerned about indoor air environment and quality than they have ever been, which is good for the industry. I've always maintained we do better with customers that care about what goes on inside their building than the ones that don't. And I think people, as a result of this, are going to be a lot more interested in that and a lot more willing to spend on it. We're seeing some really early adopter, aggressive customers that are starting to look at things that they can do proactively to try and draw people back to the building, back to the topic you guys were talking about before. Some of the more interesting things have been around transparency around indoor air quality and reporting on it, either through scoreboards or other sorts of composite metrics, which I think is interesting. I think people are still trying to feel out how does that work, but that creates some interesting challenges for us as an industry about, broadening what we're integrating, how we can consolidate and present that information in a meaningful way. I also think it drives a greater demand for reliability and performance of the building automation system, as well as many other systems being tied into it. We're starting to see some customers that are looking, and this is a little bit outside of the direct service contract definition, but in the broader services, we're seeing some customers now that are starting to look at, geez, can we tie together and measure social distancing performance? Can we start looking at patterns of that and changing the flow through our buildings? Can we use occupancy space density data to drive HVAC operation? Can we be reporting on these things and making them visible to our tenants? And then you start to get into the really far out stuff where they start to look at, we're going to start reporting on temperature sensing that we're doing at the entry to the building and how we're doing with that, as well as nearby community disease data. And we've seen some people put up dashboards around those things and tie them into their system. So I think there's a lot yet to be determined, but it's an interesting time.
Thanks, George. Dave, can I hand it over to you and make your comments, and then we'll open it up?
Sure, happy to do that. George, our experience has been much like yours. Sounds like we've been talking to the same folks. And my experience is I've been in the business 41 years, Johnson Controls, based in Milwaukee, and I guess 40 out of 41 years have been in service. So this has been an interesting time, without a doubt, for us to go through and understand. Much like George, we spent a lot of time early on talking to customers. We did surveys, and we did them by vertical markets. So we talked to each vertical market about what they were experiencing. And then we also talked, of course, to our sales teams and our operations teams in the field to find out what customers wanted, what they expected. And I've never seen anything come together so quick. As we knew we were all in trouble at that point, and we were all very quickly putting together packages and offerings and listening to customers and holding webinars as much as we possibly could to get information about how to deal with it. But I think it really came down to 4 areas of focus for us. One is with our customers, it was around, how can we help them in the area of ventilation? How can we help them in the area of filtration and disinfection? And then the concept of the touchless building. Those are the 4 areas that we spent most of our time working on. And of course, working with customers on ventilation has everything to do with what vertical market are you in. You think about an arena or stadium, which we do a lot of work in arenas and stadiums. Much of what we're doing for them in the area of ventilation is obviously there's a tremendous unoccupied mode compared to what it used to be. And so we spend a lot of time planning out how you're going to run the facility when you don't have anyone in it. Or if you go to another vertical market like a hospital, or even where we were in some cases standing up or supporting the standing up of temporary hospitals, turning tents and unoccupied areas into usable space for hospitals. I mean, it took on a whole new meaning. It really depended on the vertical market. But the ones that were unoccupied were interested in saving money and preparing for the day that employees were coming back. The ones that were highly occupied, like our hospitals, it was all about making sure that we were able to increase ventilation and we were able to improve the environment. The second piece was around filtration. Because we're a manufacturer of filters, there was a significant need to increase filtration in buildings, much like you have in a hospital environment or a clean room environment. We started seeing people move to higher rated filters and MERV 13, and that creates a whole nother set of questions that have to be answered about, can the building handle can you handle the pressure drop? Are the filter racks set up correctly? Are there other implications that would cause you to not be able to go to a higher rated filter? And then, from that, we moved to disinfection, and, that's all UV lighting and bipolar ionization. And in some cases, even temporary filtration that you put in the buildings. So those are the three areas of real focus of people that are going to run a building: ventilation, filtration, disinfection. And then you get to the touchless building. And that's where most of my experience in the last 5 years is around creating a service business out of using data from buildings, IoT, and what we call the touchless building. So there are cases where customers have tried everything they can to not have anyone in the building, including their service providers. And so what we've done is we've built out a pretty robust program around monitoring equipment remotely, whether the customer's doing it themselves. We'll set that up, we use our products to do that. But we've also done it where they've actually outsourced their command centers and moved the command center elsewhere where they don't have to bring them into their building. And so we've done that. So it's monitoring, it's triage, it's alarming when we see situations that could create a hazard for the building, doing it remotely. And that's been a very large part of what we've been working on lately. But all customers, they're all a little bit different. But the vertical markets tend to go together in terms of what they're focusing on. But this is it's been a busy time for us, and we're learning something every day of the week. And whether it be CDC or ASHRAE or the experts that we turn to build out our products and services. So that's my short explanation of what's been going on for us at Johnson Controls. And happy to take any questions if you have them.
So I've got a question for both George and David here. So my question is, so there were some similarities between the experiences that you both and your respective firms have experienced. When it comes to the COVID side, the service side, where are you seeing the discussion points take place? Where are the decisions being made in and around what you guys, both of you, just described?
I could probably take that one. What I've seen is the decisions are a lot higher in the organizations than they've ever been. We're seeing CEOs getting involved in HVAC like we've never seen it. And this has become a hot topic for obvious reasons. In fact, I read an article, Harvard Business Review talked about, your building manager has more to say about your health than your doctor does, if you think about it. And so those are the kinds of questions that we keep getting from the highest levels of every organization. So it used to be the facility manager, even the maintenance supervisors. Now the C-suite's involved in how are we going to run our building, and they want to know everything they can about the equipment. I think George brought it up, is that there's a marketing piece here, that one of the things that people are trying to do is get people to come back to their buildings. They want them to come back. And even my son, who works for a company that owns a small theater in Atlanta, they put in UV lighting because they felt like they needed to do that because that would help bring people back, even a small facility like that. And you would never, I think, see that if it hadn't been for this pandemic.
Yeah, I agree with David. I think the other thing I'd add, and it in some instances is especially acute in some of our customer base, the pharma life science customers, everybody in the organization now has a view about the HVAC system. The C-suite, to David's point, is making the decisions, but everyone wants to know about it. Everyone has a view on it. And our pharma life science customers, they have a lot of doctors in their staff. So they get a lot of opinions about how they should be handling things, what the medicine says, what the science says in terms of how they should move forward. So it's become a much more discussed and potentially sometimes contentious topic than it has ever been before.
So I've got a question for you, David. You brought up the sort of the 4 areas of focus for Johnston. And so take the filtration, take the disinfection buckets. From a service perspective, are these one-time events, or have you been able to craft that into an ongoing service where you get recurring revenue?
So far, it's an ongoing service because I think we've changed the way that we're running these buildings. When you go to a higher MERV rating on a filter, you have to redesign the system a little bit. You may even have to change shivs on fans, and to make sure that the air handling unit can handle it, and you're not going to have a problem with the system. And so once that's done, we'll run for a while. Now, will there be a day when we back off some of this? Is an example filtration. I think it's going to. I think it's only going to come with getting complete control over all of these different pandemics and all these different viruses. But I think, to me, I think there will be a time when we're going to run buildings differently. And we haven't had anyone say to us that I'm aware of to put it back in the mode that they started. They want to continue to operate it the healthiest way they possibly can.
Hey, David, based on the sort of work that you guys are talking about, does this change the type of work that the system integrator or your branches are doing from more of a services work to construction work? Has that changed the landscape in the last 6 months?
Well, for sure, the concept of remote service has changed it. So we're, as an example, we're making sure that many of our chillers, as they leave the factory, are connectable out of the factory, not waiting to do it as a retrofit in the field, because customers are asking more and more remote management of their sites. So I think we'll engineer buildings differently as a result of this. And I'm certainly not the expert on the design side. I've been a service guy most of my career, but on the design side, I'm sure there'll be changes in how these buildings will be designed. And data is going to become more and more important, because the data is what gives people comfort. If they feel like they're getting the information they need to make good decisions that's going to keep employees safe, that's going to be a large part of what they're doing. So the design of the buildings, I think, will change as a result.
How have, for George, from what you guys do as master system integrators versus David, a OEM type of organization, when you're talking to folks like this on service, how do they ask for guarantees? Do you give an SLA? How do you say we're going to deliver A, B, C, and D, and if we don't deliver A, this is what will happen? So basically, I guess what I'm asking, do you operate on guaranteed SLAs?
It's a good question. So to date, that has not been a major issue. I think, and partially for us, a lot of times our customers are running the system in their data center. So, you tend to think about SLAs around software-based applications, right? So the largest scale software applications are generally running on servers in their data center, sometimes in smaller instances on computers that are sitting on a desk somewhere. We're seeing more customers starting to move towards the cloud, but we've got a long way to go to get to that point where they're going off premise into some sort of shared setting for the majority of the customer base that we're servicing. The interesting question is, what do you do with that when you sort of move downstream from, what has traditionally been defined as the front end, right? The data of the system and the user interface at the top level or at the enterprise level, and you start to move down now to individual pieces of equipment, whether that be an air handler or a chiller or some subsystem of the building. Yeah, and in those instances, the reliability has been such that we really haven't been pressed on, convert that into some sort of an SLA type of agreement. That just hasn't been a place that the market has gone. Not that we'd be opposed to it. but it hasn't been that same sort of press or push from the customer side. And I don't know, maybe over time that becomes something that they more look for. It wouldn't be something that we'd necessarily be opposed to. The other challenge you've got around that is you have a lot of other interactions that are going on with it, and other external forces, whether that be power supplies or the systems that they're tied to, or operating staff interaction that could have some impact on that. So I don't know how you manage that at that level, but to date, it hasn't been something that we've been asked to provide.
So George, what do those contracts look like? Is it typically blocks of hours or time and materials, if across the board, rather than SLAs?
Well, so I tend to think of SLAs in terms of uptime. And so that's how I answered Mark's question. They're definitely not blocks of hours. If at all possible, we try not to be doing blocks of hours because, frankly, we find that's not what the customer is looking for. You know,
Right.
I tell our staff all the time, nobody in their right mind buys a thermostat because they want a thermostat. They buy a thermostat because they want a safe, comfortable, productive environment. And we've trained them that the thermostat is the way to get there. And so for service agreements, customers tend to buy blocks of hours because they haven't been shown a way to turn that into something more meaningful that has more value to them. And what we tend to focus on with our customers is, let's understand what your goals and objectives are. Let's understand what your priorities are. Let's understand what the capabilities are of your staff. And then let's talk about the things that need to be done to ensure that that system you've invested in is going to deliver the outcome that you want to have. And that may mean a different set of tasks for a different set of customers and or a different frequency, not only by customer type, but by area within the building. And so we will work with them to craft a plan that's tailored to their unique situation. We're going to do these sorts of things on this sort of a frequency in these areas because we've shown that those are going to deliver the outcome that you're looking for there. But in these other areas, we're going to focus on something completely different because you've got a different set of priorities there.
How about this concept of outcome-based services, potentially using analytics as a referee? Are you seeing demand for that at all, or?
I think we're seeing interest in it. I think the challenge is, and you and I can have a debate about where we're at on the readiness curve for it. I'm not sure as an industry we've got enough data behind it to be able to say with good comfort level that we can prove out the point of, if I see this happen here, this sort of event's going to happen downstream. I think we've got indicators and we've gotten better at it. I don't know that we're completely to the level that we need to be yet, but I think that is the direction we're heading. I truly believe in the long run. Right now, we're doing it heavily on calendar based, and I think over time you move to analytics driven and more responsive to the data than it is responsive to the calendar.
Right. Great. David, what do you have the same viewpoint on the outcome based services?
Yeah, I think it's definitely happening in our industry. And I think, we do have some outcome-based contracts, and the challenge always was, how do you measure, the results? Because you're going to guarantee a key performance indicator or a service level agreement. And you need to have good data to be able to take risk and then shift risk from the organization you're serving to your organization. So in the past, it's been somewhat easier to do it in a central plant where you're delivering chilled water, hot water, or steam, and you can measure it and you can measure uptime. But when you get into other areas of a building, where you're trying to guarantee results in areas where the measurement's not quite as easy, that's really what it comes down to. But I do think our industry's headed in that direction. Software as a service is there, and hardware as a service is there. It's really both, where someone wants to use their operating budget to actually pay for something, for a major investment, where historically they would go in their capital budget to get the money. They'll do it through operating. And then when you do that, you're basically buying hardware and software as a service, and you have to have KPIs and you have to have SLAs and a good way to measure. And then there's going to, at some point, be a turnover back over to the owner. But in our public-private partnership business, which is really largely Canada, although the United States is getting more and more into public-private partnerships and buildings, That's really what we have to do. You absolutely have to measure everything from your work order system. How long does it take to respond to a work order? You know, how far did you deviate from a set point? I mean, there's a number of different places where you have to measure, and there are penalties involved. So that business, I think, is coming, not as fast as maybe we'd like to see it, but it is coming.
Great. Thank you.
You bet.
David, just following up on the hardware as a service point, what does that include? Because Johnson has the York division, obviously, and then you've got controls, and you got other businesses as well. So how much is mechanical? How much is controls? Is it both?
You could do hardware as a service in both equipment and controls. It's really a matter of you've got a project and you're looking to pay for it over time, 5 years, 10 years. And you can bundle them up. And then, of course, you have to have a good legal contract to find what's in and what's out, that sort of thing. You know, the hardware, the servers, the hosting, and that's where remote monitoring also becomes really important, because, you know, you want to be able to remotely monitor systems and gather data in a very, very efficient way. And that's where it's very helpful to have all of it into a package that you can, you know, buy over time.
It's because you're Johnson and your size, you know, financing that becomes I think a lot more doable than it would for a smaller systems integrator out there trying to bundle. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think in you know, ESCOs in general, across all the ESCOs that are out there, they're a little bit larger companies, and they're taking a risk, and they've got strong financial partners. And that's historically been where that's happened.
Yeah, right.
I think smaller companies can there's opportunity for that, working with financing partners and so on. But it can be a fairly risky business when you're taking on a very, very large project,
right?
You know, and, you know, multi-million-dollar project over a number of years. And it's good to be in business for a long time if you're right.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Hey, David, on those remote monitoring services that you were talking about, is that something that Johnson's branches predominantly offer, or do the independents do that as well?
Good question about the independents. We've been offering remote service, you know, for over 25 years. It really started because of our fire business. We had a fire UL listed remote monitoring center, and then moved into building automation, moved into other predictive services as part of that. I really don't know the answer for sure how many of our independents are using those types of services, because I work more on the direct side, but it's a good question. I just don't know the answer to that one.
So you both speak about services as being where things are going, and you're kind of wanting it to go there, and we're sort of seeing the benefit of it. What would you say are the barriers of it being the sort of the norm? I mean, I'm sure there are lots, but what are sort of, how can we get there faster as an industry?
Good question.
I guess cybersecurity, you know, that's the number one reason why people aren't immediately interested in moving data from one place to the other. Even if you're moving it from a building into the cloud and you're accessing data from the cloud, not the building, there's still that concern that, you know, something could happen. And so I'd say cybersecurity is probably number one. That's been our experience in providing a really robust remote services package.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think the other side of it is the customer's economic strategy, right? How do they want to finance their business? How do they want to structure it? Do they want to move things on or off balance sheet? Do they want to do cash up front? You know, I think those barriers also come into it. In some cases, you'll see a big push in that direction, and then 5 years later, they'll change and decide they'd rather bring it, you know, in-house. So I think that plays a role as well.
George, with multiple offices like you guys have, when a service opportunity presents itself, I know you're up in New England, as you said, Boston, and does your group control the services, or does it come from a centralized place in Alberio, or how does the offices work collectively, independently, or whatnot? I'm just curious about that.
It depends on the customer and how they want to behave, right? The more decentralized they are, the more decentralized we will need to be. The more centralized they are, by the same token, it'll bring us back together. So we have a national team that provides services across the national, in fact, even a global footprint. And we have certain customers that flow through that team, and they're the single point of contact, and then distribute work down to local offices. We have other customers that have a very strong geographic presence in one area, but also a distributed presence. And so the relationship might be out of one of our local offices, and then they're managing the distribution of work out to other locations where it makes sense. It's really driven by the customer and how they want to structure the relationship and what works most effectively for them.
Thanks.
And how important is it to be able to provide the same kind of services, or the way delivered sort of across the board? Is that, I mean,
it's huge. I mean, that's part of why they go to a national relationship, right? Is that, you know, it's convenience of interaction, it's quality and consistency of service across the footprint. It's the ability to drive standards and productivity. So if you're not able to do that, you're probably not going to be successful at a national level.
Yeah, good point.
George, and just following up on Anto's question, which I thought was really good, what are the barriers? So David weighed in on cyber. What other ones do you see that are barriers?
Well, like I said, the first one that came to mind is the economic, and that's more on the, you know, hardware as a service sort of comment. I think that, yeah, I think the other side of that is to, you know, to go more back to the space where David was, where he was talking about cybersecurity. I think that there's also just an aspect of how people want to structure their operation. You know, what is their strategy for operating this facility? And if, you know, there are one manager I had for a long time was famous for, if you're looking for a helping hand, check the end of your sleeve. He was very much the sort of person that was used to, we're going to do things our way, my way. And so you've got people that have come at the industry that are used to, we need to be self-sufficient and autonomous. And so the idea of we're going to outsource critical aspects of the operation of our facility is anathema to them. Over time, that changes as people get comfortable with, yeah, I can trust people, and yeah, I can depend on them. And oh, by the way, technology really enables them to do things very differently than they used to be able to do before. You know, even I talked in my opening comments about, you know, some of our pharma customers who would never in a million years think about letting us remotely access their site, in COVID suddenly say, holy cow, that's the only way we're going to get you in here. And they try it and find out, wow, that worked a lot better than we thought. So I think you've got all those things sort of coming together, and over time it shifts as people get more comfortable with it. And the providers get more consistent in delivering a high quality level of service.
Just, yeah, one of the topics we've spent a fair amount of time on is analytics, and sort of I would call it the reluctance for the industry to really embrace it. So you've got certain customers who have become advocates for it, and they'll pay the money for the analytics, but it's, at least I know Jim Lee has spoken repeatedly about this being, it's not yet mainstream. And yet we talk about what we've talked about here so far really says, if you're going to deliver these high quality remote services, we're going to need analytics. To me, that's a potential barrier, is getting the customer to recognize they need to pay for that knowledge and to have the right tools in place to take advantage of the knowledge. So the data is all sitting there, but if you don't have the analytics on top of it to analyze it in an effective manner. So how are you guys seeing that as an issue? Just getting them to understand that analytics has to be part of the solution here, not just the controls.
I guess I've got a comment on that. It's an interesting industry, you know. 40 years ago, when it came to analytics, obviously we had none. And even sensors, you know, we'd have 10 sensors on a machine. And they were thermometers and pressure transducers, you know, that's all they were. Nowadays, we ship one chiller, it's got 250 sensors on it. And with that information, you move that to the cloud, you create incredible analytics. You can compare assets across a model number across the globe. And you can, you know, look for anomalies and do advanced troubleshooting. But even still, with all that data and all that information now being available, we still run into customers that are not interested in remote service. They still want that physical inspection. They're not interested in the analytics. And I think it's going to slowly fade out, but it's still there. And just that having that high confidence that, you know, and our mechanics and technicians are really our most important people in our company. So I can't argue with them to some extent, but we do know that with analytics, it makes their jobs a lot easier. They're a lot more efficient. They can cover a lot more ground if they have a, you know, iPad in their hand and they're looking at 6 sites instead of 1, and they're able to call customers and solve problems much quicker. But there's still a bit of reluctance to just rely on analytics. It's still there. Again, I think it will fade out over time. You know, our newer facility managers are much more technical savvy. They're used to dealing with analytics. They're used to dealing with real-time information and mobility, but we still see it. And so it's a matter of us really creating a good argument for it, why we're doing it, why it's good for them, why it's good for our technicians and our mechanics, you know, why it's really good for the guys in the field and how they can serve them better. But it's a great question. The faith in analytics is going to be very important going forward.
Right.
I'm sorry, George.
No, go ahead. That's all right.
I just wanted to follow up on David. So from what I'm hearing from you, you're seeing that the value of the analytics is more in the hands of your guys than in the hands of the end user per se.
It's really both.
Okay.
Really, I'd throw the customer in there too. So your customer has a view, your mechanic or your technician has a view, your remote operations center has a view, and then you triangulate, you know, a problem. And, you know, you've got the benefit of the knowledge of really the 3 most important people in the equation are you know, your customer and the technician or mechanic that's working on it and your experts that are working out of a remote center. You put all 3 together, I think you've really got something. And so, you know, sometimes problems can be solved by one of the 3, but when they solve with all 3, then you know you're really working together collaboratively to get problems.
Thanks.
I think we're back to Steve's question. First of all, I think we deliver high quality services already. But to get to that next level, I think analytics plays a role in it. I think that the challenge is a couple of things. David brings up a really good point about the people wanting that personal interaction, which kind of goes back to the conversation you guys had at the beginning about CEOs saying Zoom's got some issues. We need to get back in the building. I think there's merit to that. But I also think it's not dissimilar to, you know, the PC industry before they had Excel. We haven't come up with the killer app yet. We've got products that work well. We've got solutions that fit particular things. But when I look at our company and our approach, it's still more of a one-off. We go to each customer and uncover the problem that we can solve using analytics instead of being able to say broad brush, here's this solution that we can offer you that draws everyone in. And I don't know that as an industry, we've come up with the Excel version yet that explains why everybody needs to buy a PC, or in this case, everyone needs to have analytics in addition to the building automation system that they've got in their facility. I personally believe they do, but I don't know that we as an industry have come up with a compelling enough value proposition that reaches the broad market to get them to understand it's not enough to take this step, you've got to go one step more. I think there's a lot of pieces that are coming. David talked about it in terms of the quantity of data. It's daunting. I mean, one of the things I talk to customers about all the time is 10 years ago, if you asked me about monitoring electricity, you know, I'd have an electric meter with 2 points. Today, I'm going to have 50 meters spread across the building, and they're going to be BACnet compatible, and every one of them is going to give you 50 points. That is a tsunami of data that customers cannot manage their way through, but they haven't found the reason yet to say, I got to get that next tool to be able to do it. I think we're close, but I don't think we're there yet.
So
Jim can really disagree with me.
What's that?
I said you could freely disagree with me.
I think we all agree. One of the hallmarks of SaaS and cloud, and obviously other types of services these days, is the flexibility, the ability for customers to pick and choose and change the services that they get, or the applications that they get. I haven't really heard you use the word flexibility very much. Do you think that's an issue, or is the fact that buildings last forever mean that flexibility isn't important?
Well, so I didn't use the word flexibility, but if you remember up front, I talked about, recognizing that these things change over time and you've got to be able to adapt to it. So I think fundamentally, you've got to be able to change what you're doing over time, because the staffing is going to change, the environment in which they're living is going to change, the priorities for the building are going to change, their fundamental strategy about how they want to operate the building is going to change. You've got to be able to adapt to that. And remember, I came at it from the standpoint more of the traditional service contract, that sort of an environment. I think when you get to a SaaS offering, a full SaaS offering, yeah, you've got to be able to turn on and off those features on demand on the fly.
But George, can the customer adapt their financial buying system to any of this stuff that we're talking about?
Yeah, that's actually that's an even better question, right? Somebody brought up MSI earlier, and we get involved in those conversations on a pretty regular basis as well. And that's a massive challenge for the traditional industry to change how they buy things. And that change, I think, it occurs even more slowly over time, because there's too many stakeholders involved, and it's too difficult to get everybody to change as quickly. So I think that, it's a really good point, Jim. I think that is an impediment that stays with us, that only the most proactive customers are going to work around in that portion of the procurement process. I think once you get past the sort of capital event of we built a building and you shift into the operating mode, I think they've got a lot more flexibility and they're less constricted. But I think until you've crossed that threshold, I think it's really hard to get them to fundamentally change the way they purchase things across the board.
Right.
So a question, go back to analytics for a minute. Both David and George, if you both would weigh in on this, is that I think everybody on this call and in our industry agrees on the importance of analytics. I guess where I'm coming from, and both of your respective companies have people who understand analytics, who can interpret it. But when you get to the client side, at least I have found that when you talk building and operating analytics and all the stuff we all talk about, the understanding of those types of analytics is very few and far between. Do you guys feel that the same way? So therefore, analytics really is our tools, whether this our industry's tool. Comment on that.
Yes, I take a thought there. There's two types of analytic tools. One is built for the customer, the way in terms of what they want to see, a dashboard, if you will. And then there's another layer of data or analytics that most customers, at least in my experience, are not interested in. There's much more detail behind that. So you really have a concept of two dashboards, one for your customer, which is high enough level, gives them what they want, what they need. And then we may have to have something internally where it goes much, much deeper to be able to solve more complex problems that quite frankly, they're not interested in. They're really only interested in the high level KPIs. And so we have spent some time working with our customers to understand what they want and build it in such a way that it's going to help them run their building and not confuse them or give them stuff that is not going to be of any help.
So we're at 4 o'clock. So we need to bring this to a wrap. George, David, do you want to make some closing comments to take us out of here?
Oh, sure, you're going to let me go first?
Well, you're on the left.
You're looking for wisdom and insight at the end?
Yeah, right.
I guess I don't know that I have a summary concept or comment. Just thank you for the opportunity to be here. I enjoyed the conversation. I think there's a lot of great potential here. It's just going to be interesting to see how this evolves over time.
I do want to thank you for letting me be part of it. I've been on a few panels, and this is a panel that's really thinking about where we are and where we're going. So glad to be part of it. The only thing I'd say is communication, collaboration is the key. We got to solve this together. I'm learning something new every single day. So anything that anyone has to share, I'm all ears. This is the biggest challenge I've been through in my career. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us, David Bishop and George West. And this wraps up this day's show, and video of this will be up by morning. And other than that, hope to see you all on next Monday on Monday Live. So thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.